I'm Simon Maxwell. I run the Overseas Development Institute, a think tank in London. We had a meeting on the G20 at lunchtime today in which people queued up to say that the G8 was a busted flush because the new configuration involving the BRICS and other countries was going to be the place where decisions were made. I was surprised because I agree with Kumi that I think our Prime Minister made a remarkable contribution in 2005, not only on Africa but also on climate change. But I'm curious to know whether the G8 is a busted flush, who else should be brought around the table, what kinds of configurations will lead our world in the years to come.
Tony, would you like to try that?
Well,
as the only G8 head here.
First of all, I think the reality is, let me be careful exactly how I phrase this, but I think the reality is, I think the G8 is undergoing a process of change now. Look, we had the G8+5 dialogue to get the climate change issue on the agenda. We've been now having African countries regularly at the G8. I mean, I think if the G8 is going to succeed in the future, then it's for others to determine in the future exactly how that will be done. But I can't see the G8 having the same authority politically unless it's got China and India and
Ireland.
I think there's more of the Irish nationality and of course the German represented around this table. You guys get everywhere anyway. So quite right too. But I think that I just want to pick up on this question, which I think is really important. How do you build support for this? Because look, my experience of this situation over the years is that, you know, it's just too easy to all sit around and say, well, if only the politicians had the will, it would all get done. Okay, it's important the politicians have the will, of course it is. But I think this issue to do with capacity is incredibly important, you know, fundamentally important. The only way you're going to get support for this is through both people in Africa and people outside who need to support the process of change in Africa, really feeling not merely that it's important they have the will, but it's going to be effective when that will is then translated into action. Now, what was done with Live Aid and what Bono and Bob and his colleagues did and what people like Bill are doing is absolutely extraordinary. There's no doubt at all that's had an amazing galvanizing effect. And you were kind enough to say, you know, we allowed you guys to come in and run amok at the G8 summit. Actually, you were better behaved than a lot of the leaders. But anyway, it was
Shame on us.
Yeah, but actually part of that was building support around a realistic platform. That was the whole purpose of having the Africa Commission. So you didn't just go out there with a series of sort of what they used to call them, the old days of student politics, transitional demands and all the rest of it. You know, there was a genuine sense, look, here is a practical plan. Now, the reason why this capacity issue is so important is that if we want to move forward with that public support, it's not just about the politicians deciding they're going to have the political will. It's not simply about the NGOs and other organisations coming behind this and really pushing it forward. We need to make sure, frankly, that on these issues of capacity to do with governance or conflict resolution, that what I call the hard end of this, I mean, the vital end, important, you know, HIV/AIDS treatment, what I was talking about in education is absolutely essential, but governance is important. You know, eliminating corruption is important, making sure that we have the peacekeeping facility that we need. What is going on in Darfur at the moment is and the absence of action internationally on it is not a great signal when, you know, we want to motivate the world in coming forward for Africa. So, you know, what Thabo was saying is absolutely right about the Africa Union. And actually, he's obviously trying to sort that situation out. But we need the Africa Union to be a coherent force with the instruments of power behind it so that it can move into situations like Darfur, so that the things that we're talking about actually end up being done. And the other thing, which I think is absolutely vital, if we're going to get our public opinion on side, and I know this may sound a sort of very narrow political point, but I think it's very important when you're in the practical world of politics trying to get your public opinion, you know, to meet these commitments, which I know these commitments in some ways are very modest, but when you're actually sitting there with all the other competing demands and, you know, sometimes, as was being said earlier, you know, it's a job to move your public opinion on some of these issues. But the other point that we've got to make is this. There are reasons of moral imperative to act on Africa, but there are also reasons of strategic self-interest for all the nations around the world. If we allow Sudan to deteriorate, if we allow what happens in Somalia to generate thousands of refugees, if we end up in a situation where you have Africa that is potentially a rich country with so many poor people, if you allow this situation to continue, we all suffer. Of course it is African people who suffer in their poverty and as a result of conflict and disease most. Of course that is true. But the other thing we've got to say to our part of the world today is it is in the nature of the modern world today that if we allow this situation to continue, we suffer as well. The consequences are visited on all of us, and therefore there is a strategic imperative of interest as well as a moral cause in changing that situation.